Hello everyone, and welcome to the HoW Gamers live show. Today we are celebrating strategy games. Slytherin has been developing and publishing strategy and war games for over 20 years now. And two missions have always guided our choices since the very beginning. From day one, we wanted to make strategy and war games for a core audience. Now, we never tried the shortcuts, right? We always wanted in our intention to address these games to a number of players that was very specific. And of course, we always wanted to attract new audiences and appeal to a wider spectrum of players. But we have never done that at the expense of gameplay, or depth, or complexity. In short, we never shied away from the word niche. Because, you know, niche is a good thing. If you embrace the idea that it doesn't mean small, it's kind of a passion for something very specific. It's a dedication, and we desperately wanted to build a solid business around this passion and this dedication. This is the second part of the mission, right? Building a solid business. And doing that for such a long time in the video games industry is very hard, believe me. You know, this has been a long journey, and the video games market is super unforgiving. It can swallow you very, very fast if you commit any mistake. But in all these years, we managed to do all this thanks to a very solid management. All of the management of Slytherin has been knowing each other for over 15 years. We've been working with each other for 15 years. And people like JD and Ian and Eric Routins and Phil and Richard Evans, we have always worked with each other, trusting each other. We're friends, and we have always tried to fight to make our way in this market. And we have done that growing steadily and fast over the last 20 years. We have built a business that can stand the test of time. And hopefully you will see this more today, because we want to give you a glimpse of what's going to happen in the future of Slytherin and the future of strategy games. Everything you'll hear today is not made with a self-indulgent goal. We have tried to put together a show that's interesting, that's full of interesting news and topics, and you will also see stuff that we have already announced, but also things that we have never announced, we have never showed before. We've got full 4 hours of shows, so try and make some time and follow us throughout. And before we get to the product part, which will happen in about an hour and a half, before that we would like to focus on a more corporate angle. And this is why I'm going to shortly connect with Ian McNeill, the CEO of Slytherin. After that, we'll have JD to discuss the pro work. Following that, we have Dimitris from the Command development team to go through Command and its evolutions. After, we'll have a little break for war games, like our Matrix games, core war games, and then we'll dive into gameplay. Gameplay for us means games that we have already announced and that we will show you for the first time, or show first features for the first time today. So Warhammer 40K Battle Sector, Decent Words 2, and Starship Troopers. After that, we'll have a last hour where we are going to announce you 4 new games you have never heard of. So make sure you stay connected, you stay with us, and you'll see a lot of very, very cool things. Right, so I've used a lot of time already, so let me connect with Ian McNeill, our CEO. Hello, Ian.
Hi, Marco. Hi, everyone.
Hello,
Great to be here today. Very exciting.
It is very exciting indeed. Ian, we have a lot of things to go through, and the idea is that we try to cover with you what it's been like to run a business throughout the pandemic and a growing business during the pandemic. And the first thing I wanted to sort of look at with you was the fact that a lot of new people joined the company over the last year and a half in the middle of the pandemic.
No, absolutely. We've added 27 people in the last year, and it's a big percentage growth for us. So it's around a 67% growth. So we're up to 67 full-time people, and that's been a challenge. Onboarding people during the lockdown is really tough. Everything has to be done online. So it has definitely been a challenge, but we've got some great people, and they're already contributing really, really valuable stuff to the projects, and don't know how we do without them now, to be honest. So it's there, Marco's got a collage up of some of the new guys that have joined, and it's been a really exciting time. Really, really good to be growing, but really painful to be doing it during such complicated times.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things was to also, as you said, integrate these new people in the staff, because we had, processes and stuff that was already happening, and we had to add processes in the meantime. So, what did we learn, in managing a company throughout these very hard times?
Well, I think we learned that we'd much rather do it without a lockdown. That's certainly the number one choice. But we're a really unusual company because we do such a wide range of things. So we're a publisher, and that means you need all of the skills associated with that: the marketing, branding, accounts, business development, tech support, and operations team. But then we're also a developer. We have internal development. So you've got your programmers, artists, then web team for running all the websites, plus all the services we provide to the developers. So the multiplayer systems, what we call Play by Email ++ tournaments. Then the IT people for system admins and getting everyone's stuff working. And then we also got the pro side, which is where we're dealing with the professional customers now. And you need a whole different set of skills for that. So we have a huge number of different types of roles and skills. And that's a challenge in itself, even without the pandemic. It's just we're doing so many different things. So that and growing all of that over the pandemic has been tough. It's tricky to add people to teams. There are certain things that work quite well in a pandemic and some things that don't. So our business was already quite distributed. We had a lot of people working from home already. We've got the office in Epsom and the office in Milan, but over half the staff were working remotely even before the pandemic. And so we were kind of set up for it, and we'd already done pre-lockdown tests to check that we had all the equipment and everything was able to connect. So it was relatively painless when we initially went into lockdown. And some things work fine when you've got those processes and procedures and everyone knows what they're doing. It can work well during the lockdown. And some things can even work better because people can just work when they need to. But there are things that are a lot harder. So it's really hard to onboard people. Mentioned that already, but bringing new people into a team is really hard. All those conversations and just relationship building, it's really hard to build those relationships. And so we've started doing things like every morning we'll have a Skype video call with people to try and just get faces to names. So each of the teams is doing their own kind of Skype call and chats.
One of the things that I was noticing today, it's the first time I personally saw some of my new colleagues for this event. So it's after all these months, it's been quite outstanding on its own. The other thing we're seeing that's some of the pains of growing in general is that we have a lot of people that we don't know. We have to delegate, and mostly this happens when when you kind of get to know people and when you get to get in touch with them. When you don't know them, straight on, letting go is always a bit trickier, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because we're growing, you have to be delegating the jobs. Otherwise, what's the point in adding staff? There's nothing for them to do unless you're delegating something to them. And to start with, that's really tough because we're a very hands-on company. We do have management, but there's nobody that just manages. Everybody's doing something as well. So you might be the marketing director, but you also do an awful lot of actual work rather than just herding people. The first time you kind of hand these tasks off and then you realize that the people are actually able to do it, it helps build your confidence. The people we've been adding some great people recently, and once they're able to take that role and run with it, it starts to make you realize that it is possible to hand these things off, and it gets easier to hand more things off. And my plan is to hand everything off and go and sit on an island in the Caribbean somewhere, but haven't quite got there yet.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea at all. One of the things that I was noticing is the sheer number of products that we are trying to handle at the same time. And we have some announcements today and things that are coming up shortly. We have almost a release a week. So one of the things that was interesting to see was the number of projects that we handle. There's, I believe, 39 active projects right now.
Yes, it's a lot of projects. And for our size, we do an incredible amount of work. So for the size of the team, we're making a lot of stuff happen. And to do that, we've had to put a lot of processes in place. So over the years, we've kind of refined our processes and our systems and streamlined things. And now we have a really, really good way of getting through things. Everyone knows exactly what their responsibilities are, and it's working really well. So we've got a lot of different teams we're working with, and they range in size from, some of them are one-man teams, and some of them are big developers like Creative Forge with nearly 100 developers. So it's a vast range, and the kinds of games those teams can make is obviously very, very different as well. And we're continually adding new developers to our kind of community as well. So we're always on the lookout for good new opportunities, or good new developers and good new games. And those relationships we like to build. We don't like one game deals. We're really looking for long-term relationships where we can work with developers over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's been a challenge, I think, especially in this phase that we used to meet with our developers at least once a year or at the shows and so on. And now we started completely new relationships with developers we have never met. And we almost are in this situation where I remember back in the days where we had maybe small developers, like 2-3 people team, that were working remotely since forever and they've never met each other. And I thought, how's that possible? How can you do that? And now we're into that situation, and I find it almost like surreal. It's a very interesting situation to be placed into, especially when you have to work on projects that are increasingly more complex and difficult to handle.
No, definitely. When you've got lots of moving parts, everything's getting more complex. The number of roles, even in game development, the roles are becoming more specialized and more kind of fragmented. So you need different people for doing different parts of the system. And so we're quite often outsourcing large chunks of work these days. So we used to do a lot in-house or in team, but increasingly we're outsourcing specific tasks that are very specialized out to either art houses or coding houses or wherever, really, just getting the skills in where we need them, and trying to keep our core development teams as the more generalists. And if we need those specific skills, we bring them in as we need them.
Yeah, one of the interesting facts here is that as you mentioned, we started working with with bigger teams and teams with more structure and that are able to maybe handle 1 or 2 projects at a time. Now we've also kicked off the K project, which is a good way of remaining anchored to the traditional indie games that we started with.
Yes, definitely. So the larger projects by nature they're less risky. You generally you're looking at someone who's already established. They can make a certain type of game, and you're kind of taking that game and making the most of it and upgrading it and improving it visually and refining it. But you don't get the chance to experiment and do the kind of the wild and wacky ideas. And the K project is a great opportunity to do that. So these smaller independent developers come up with some weird and wonderful ideas, things that we can't justify allocating a large team or a large budget to, but some really innovative stuff. And so it is a great way of keeping in touch with kind of the indie roots and our indie roots and helping those developers to get established as well.
Yeah, I think ICBM was a very good example of that with massive success and a growing number of players even currently, right? One of the things you mentioned, Ian, was that we now release almost something every week, right? As we said, we have established processes and so on. But how do we manage? How do we manage to release all these things, on a weekly basis, as with remote work and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so over the years, we've really refined that process. So we started off we've always had what we used to call a production team. We've now renamed to operations. And the operations team take all the builds that come in from developers and they put them through various processes, building installers and all those kind of things, integrating with Steam Pipe. And as we're integrating with more stores, Steam, Epic, GOG, there's different processes for each. And so the number of builds is really exploding, as well as the number of games. And we've started off with tracking the builds on a whiteboard. So a few years ago, we started creating a whiteboard and allocating kind of tickets. We had the magnetic whiteboard. There we go, picture. And each of the game builds that came in we called them tickets, and we stuck them on the board. And they were allocated to a different person in operations, and then they were tracked through the system. And they had different information on them, like the game ID and the build number and all sorts of useful info. And they were being tracked through the system. And it gave a good way at a glance of seeing what was going on and where the priorities were. And you just put your head into the operations team's room and you could see what was going on there. So that was working fine for a while, but then we started the process of digitizing that. So especially, that would have been no use at all to us during lockdown. Luckily, we'd already made a digital version of PDS before lockdown started. And this internally is used, and every single build that the developers send to us goes into this. And there's a little form that the producers create, and it tracks it through the system. And there you can just see an example of what's currently in the system there as of when that screenshot was taken. So there's builds in various different states, different platforms. So you've got GOG, PC Steam. Then some are complicated because you've got PC Steam, Linux Steam, GOG, Epic. So that game there, when Gladius comes in, you have 6 different builds that have to get prepared. So the amount of work is exploding, and these digital systems really help us to manage the process. And one of the other things we've done a lot of is creating checklists. So there are so many things that can go wrong with a game, and every release we have a post-mortem afterwards, and we look at it and we say what went wrong, what could have gone better, and what comes out of it are these checklists. And there are checklists for everything. And every time we're going through the different stages on a release, we're going through, and the producer or the marketing brand manager, whoever's allocated on the project, will go and tick these off line by line and check them off. And when they get to the end of it, kind of put their name and sign it, and then say kind of owns that process. And that gets then filed. And it's a really good way of creating some accountability and some to try and make sure these processes run smoothly. What you tend to find, though, is that because games are so complex and the things keep changing, is you keep finding new ways to make things go wrong. So the checklists keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah, I think that our viewers couldn't blame anything that we are not open. So we're showing exactly what we do every day, to release a game, which is I
It's
think
behind
very
the
very
curtain.
interesting. So it's really going behind the scenes and of our daily lives, really. You were mentioning that there's a lot of builds happening. I think we have a chart here with the number of builds we had in the current. I think this is for 2020, right? So. There was nearly 1,000 builds and patches being built, so that's pretty outstanding.
Yeah, these are builds that got released to the public. This isn't just internal development builds. This is 941 actual builds were released. So it's 3 a day. If you count working days, it's closer to 4 a day that are going out. So there is an awful lot going on, and it's not even just recent games. So I was having a look through, and we've actually got, for next week, we've got a patch coming in for Eagle Day, bombing the Reich. Last week we had a patch for Close Combat Whacked on Rhine, which is 10 years old. And the week before that, we had a Forge of Freedom patch, which is 15 years old. And they're not just minor things. Forge of Freedom, for example, uses Flash, and Flash is no longer supported. And so the developers actually stripped Flash out of Forge of Freedom and created a patch so it continues to run for all the people out there. So supporting games in the long term is a really important part of our philosophy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that the fact that we keep working on games, releasing DLCs is a thing, right? It's part of the commercial life of the products, and we'll see that. But it's also very important that we keep the games compatible and all that kind of stuff, and that's a job on its own. And when you have a catalog of over 200 games, that easily becomes a huge workload on its own. So that's pretty impressive. And the other thing we were mentioning before, with Gladius having an inordinate amount of builds whenever we have a new release, we are now present in over 100 storefronts. Just to give an example, today we're announcing 4 games. All the product pages for these 4 games will have to go live at the same time. We also have Battle Sector, Warhammer 40,000 Battle Sector pre-orders going live. Coordinating all of that is becoming a huge task on its own, because there's all the storefronts, there's all the product pages you have to check and make sure that all the materials are used in the proper way. So, big number of builds, big number of stores. It's almost like growing out of proportion sometime, and we just realized that we might need someone doing just this, which was something that we would do in our spare time just maybe a year ago.
Yeah, definitely. So like you say, when you've got the number of platforms, the number of DLCs, and the number of storefronts, if they're all increasing, then the overall kind of number of things you're dealing with is exponentially increasing. And there are, like you say, new job roles appearing we didn't used to need someone to do this, but now this type of thing is happening so often that a new job is created.
It's a good opportunity if you get your CVs ready, because there's always something potentially appearing on our career page. So make sure you watch out for that. Another important part is having active projects. So Gladius is a good example. Panzer Corps 2 is a good example. We currently have 12 active projects, 6 of which are over 2 years old. So this means that when a game releases, we keep working on DLCs and more content, is either paid for or free content, and that impacts the shelf life, what we call the shelf life of a product, the life cycle of a product. How do we decide how long the life cycle of a product is, and how do we sort of manage that in a proper way?
Our thinking on this has changed dramatically over the last 5 years or so. If you go back, the number of DLCs we used to do was far lower, but the whole industry has changed, and it's moving towards what they're calling games as a service, where there's a lot of free-to-play games, or there are games that release and they keep producing content, because it's very hard to get attention. There's so many different ways to spend your time now that getting people's attention, getting eyes on your game, and getting players is really hard these days. And once you've got those players, you need to make the most of it. And so that's why there's a switch from making a game, moving to the next game, onto making a game, developing that game, developing that game, and developing that game. The whole industry is moving in this direction. And in general, we're looking at every game now as how can we build a long life to this. So when we're starting out, we always want to have a game that has a real future. There are a few exceptions where we know there's a game we're making which is very hard to build on. So, for example, the strategic command style games and the Field of Glory Empire style games, they're real flagship titles for us, but they're very hard to carry DLC for because they just don't suit that model. But they're still the kind of games we want to make. But wherever possible, we're looking to build a long-term future and a way that players can invest more time in it. Because we're finding that players increasingly want to look at a game and to think that this is a game I could be playing for the next 5 years. And quite often, if they can't see a way they can be playing it for years to come, they won't make the purchase decision to go in and buy it. The vast majority of them won't actually play it for that long, but they have this idea that they will. And so you've got to have that proposition there to get them to adopt it.
Yeah. Well, one of the key facts here is that, games like Battlestar Galactica, for instance, or Panzer Corps or Warhammer 40k Gladius had their best year very late into their shelf life. So a Panzer Corps or a Battlestar Galactica, you have to wait 3, 4, 5 years before you get to the peak of their commercial performance. This is a very clear testament to the fact that this is exactly what we're talking about, right? The fact that the idea of a franchise that goes on for a very long time. And of course, this impacts dramatically the workload for developers and how the developer structures the way it's working. Looking at the future. That's
absolutely. We're actually having to change the way we structure contracts, because the way we were doing contracts with developers, it was very much focused on we build the game and then we worry about the DLC later. Now we're making sure that the contracts are built with the long-term future of the project in mind. How are the DLC going to work? How many DLC can we build into the base contract? What options are we going to build in for future DLC? All those kind of things. It's stuff that, it's impacting everything. The whole financial situation on a project as well. You still get that spike on day one and the numbers will still drop off. But then every time a DLC comes along, you create a spike for that DLC, but it also sucks up sales of everything that supports it. So the base game will spike a little bit. And then over time, once you have enough of these similar things out there, when a DLC releases, the spike it creates and all the little spikes it creates in the other things end up with the overall revenue actually creeping upwards. So like Mark, I was saying, you can find that your revenue from a game in year 3 is more than you get in year 1. And that's something we're seeing increasingly with games that are fully supported in the long term.
Well, Ian, we're kind of given an idea of what it was like to run, the business over the pandemic. I think, in my initial note, I was saying, we stay true to our roots, and we want to keep working on strategy and war games and develop further the potential, number of players for our games, and we'll see about that when we announce the new products. Is there anything you want to say about where we come from and where we're going as well?
Well, I mean, our roots are obviously in the wargaming area. I've been playing war games since I was 6, tabletop war games. So that's really in my blood, and I am a war gamer, and I love playing war games. The only problem with running a computer games company that makes war games is we make almost all the games I want to play, and it's not quite the same playing your own games, because you end up finding that you're analysing everything all the time rather than just playing and enjoying it. So what we need is a bit of competition out there, someone else making games so I can go and play them. But going forwards, we definitely plan to continue this. We are making bigger budget games, and we are making some games that are kind of crossing into a more mainstream area. But we absolutely don't want to move away from our roots. We need those deep, hardcore war games that people can progress to. So these more mainstream games are great for getting people into the hobby, but we like to provide that progression where they can start with these simpler, more mainstream games and move into the more deep and hardcore games. And we absolutely plan to support those. And it is harder to find developers making those kind of games at the moment. That's the only thing. So if there are any developers out there making those deep, hardcore strategy games, definitely feel free to reach out to us, because we're always on the lookout for that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, Ian, thanks a lot for joining us in this first part. I'm going to see you later as well, but we'll now move to the next section. Thanks for giving us all these insights and for sharing a little bit of a peek into what Slytherin's day at work is. And we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Speak to you later.